Talking about how various technologies alter rapidly how we have approached and how we need to approach doing things like park rangering or environmental interpretation, which is helping people find a connection with the natural world around them in terms of deeper understanding, but without being persuaded or tricked or marketed into it. It's just, let's introduce you to the world around you and help you understand what you're seeing, and in that way, foster a meaningful sense of connection. And we were talking about how technology and, in particular, internal combustion engines, like with rotary wing aircraft like helicopters, and combining advancing technologies, energy density with gasoline, and a free market capitalist environment, some would say a late stage capitalist environment. We have companies like Red Bull putting ideas into at least the American consciousness about what forest and outdoor recreation, not what it is, but what it could be. All for the purposes of selling, caffeinated sugar chemical slurries. But technology advancement in forest and outdoor recreation isn't all kind of a headache in terms of introducing new kinds of impacts or moving people further into wilderness areas, for example, to impact places that we've never had to worry about that before. There's also some really cool stuff going on. So with thin film or flexible monocrystalline silicon solar panels, we can turn the rain fly of a tent into a cell phone charger, a heater, an emergency beacon transmitter, whatever we might need for, electrical stuff way out in the woods. So this is cool, but it's also potentially kind of a monkey's paw, right? So if you're out in the forest, but you're glued to your phone the whole time, are you experiencing those benefits that over the past decades and years and millennia, people have derived from being present in their environment out in the forest somewhere? So, it's a non-trivial conversation to think about the last national park or national park-like place that you visited, maybe solo or with some friends or with your family back in the day. And think about how 30 years ago, visiting that park might have been a little bit different than your most recent trip there, solely for the fact that cellular data coverage sort of bleeds into protected natural area spaces and worms its way in. Even back in 2004, when I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, the National Park Service had just agreed to put the first 3 cellular transmission towers inside the perimeter of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And immediately it changed how people were going there. So when you have cell phone coverage, or, and here's the kicker, when you believe you will have cell phone coverage, regardless of the actual reality when you're out there, you plan a different trip. Because if we get in trouble, we can just pull out that phone, right? And so just in the past couple of years with the, iPhone 14 Pro, I think, Apple has introduced to cell phones. Everybody's got a cell phone these days. The ability to get emergency satellite-based communications back and forth between an Apple operator, emergency dispatch, and you. Pretty much anywhere in the world. Now there are some few limitations on that, but most folks who are hiking with a regular old iPhone these days are not going to the extreme poles, for example, where there's not satellite coverage, not that same line of sight. So this is already somewhat changing how we do forest and outdoor recreation as recreationists, which means that this changes how we do forest and outdoor recreation management as rangers, superintendents, interp rangers, park guides, and so on and so forth. Because we were talking about, we invent bicycle helmets, and we start doing crazier bicycle tricks, bigger drops off of cliffs and stuff like that, because we're wearing a helmet, we'll be safe if we crash, right? There are lots of ways to harm a human body other than just the head. but it's an observed and reasonably strong effect that when folks are wearing helmets, they'll try riskier things because they think they're safe. And the truth may or may not actually play out that way on the ground, right? So if you're expecting to go to Great Smoky Mountains National Park and you plan a day-long hike and you pack pretty light for it, because if we get into trouble, right, there's rangers all over this place. We'll just pull out our satellite communications on our iPhones, and it's free for the first 2 years, so let me just have a ranger hike me off this mountain if I get tired or lost or injured, right? And one absolutely classic story in the search and rescue literature, this is a while back ago now, two ladies were hiking on a mountain in Maine, and the weather changed and got pretty bad, and so they got cold and wet and disoriented, and they called for help. So I believe a local off-duty firefighter responded for the search and rescue extrication, pulled them off the mountain, and they were so disoriented and I guess pre-hypothermic that they ended up in the fog that had set in, driving off a boat ramp thinking it was a road and drowning in water. And so it's a good thing to be able to call out, but it's a really bad thing if you end up calling out because you were less prepared because you had the phone to call out. Does that make sense? All right, so I'm really belaboring this point, but this is a big one, right? Every search and rescue call is a risk for you, the responder. So first responders have to kind of wrestle with this idea. And in the national park system, at least, the search and rescue ethic is if anyone calls for help, no matter what, we will go. Whether or not it's a good idea, it's a bad idea, if the person's just being whiny, or if they're genuinely in like emergency life-threatening danger. We will send the cavalry, we'll get the person out. And that has some consequences, right? Some ecological consequences if we put machinery out over this wild landscape to be able to four-wheeler the person back right. We're driving through at relatively high speed on off-highway terrain, and that is dangerous for the driver. It's also dangerous for the people being rescued in the sense that more than once it's caused helicopter crashes trying to pull people off of mountains because the air, up on top of a mountain is very, very thin, and so those rotary blades on the helicopter, they don't push as well. They don't generate lift as well as they do at lower elevations. And so, search and rescue is tricky, and it's risky for the people trying to do the rescuing, as well as already a clear risk for the people needing the rescue. So, technology is absolutely changing this equation for better and for worse, right? There are always main effects and side effects and so forth. Another kind of technological advancement is, I guess this video is broken, but you can kind of see this is downhill mountain biking or big drop biking, where you just roll off of a cliff and drop 15, 20, 30 feet down onto a lower slope or a ramp down below. This is only even physically possible in about the last 30 years. Before that, bicycles were basically road bikes, not built for stuff like this, and or they were beach cruisers, really heavy bikes meant for just kind of like low-key tourist use on the boardwalk kind of thing. And so the first generation, downhill gravity bikers, big drop bikers, cross-country folks, before the 1970s, were basically riding until they couldn't anymore, until their bodies couldn't tolerate the impact or the bike couldn't, right? So with advanced metallurgy, with advanced material science like carbon composites, ceramide composites, fiberglass isn't so great for this, but we have metal alloys now. You can get a magnesium or titanium frame bike, and it costs a lot, but man, we have some pretty awesome science going into those bike frames and those spokes and those shocks and so forth, and we can make it possible to do big drop biking. So that's a new thing. And that means something in terms of environmental impacts in these places, right? Not all these places can handle this, but in places where we can, like Red Rocks country out west, where it's just exposed bedrock and thin bits of soil, not a big deal. All right, let's see. Also broken. We're also seeing kind of a packaging and sanitizing and commercialization of lots of different traditional forms of forest and outdoor rec. We already saw the climbing wall simulator thing, right, on Tuesday. This is a skydiving simulator. So this is like a B-52 propeller and engine, and just, blasting air up at 250 miles an hour or whatever. And this is lots of fun. Has anybody ever been on a skydiving simulator before? Oh, it's kind of like your brain says, I'm falling, but your eyes say, I'm just kind of floating in place, and they're lots of fun. Also, they're kind of horrible because prop engine, pretty much all aviation engines, discharge all of their exhaust along the plume of this, so you're breathing in like diesel or Jet A fuel. Jet A burns really dirty. Anyway, minor point. But yeah, so this is a thing, right? So we have climbing walls now. We have skydiving simulators. We have every kind of forest and outdoor recreation replicated in hyper-realism, that is oversaturated colors, smooth motion in virtual reality now. And so there's some question, it's an open question, of what happens to our national parks if, and let's kind of camp on this question for a sec as a class, what happens to our national park system when a generation of people for the first time in human existence grows up playing a virtual form of nature, a virtual form of wildlife ecology in the form of Pokemon? And they're not necessarily growing up going out to these national parks in the way that their grandparents used to in the golden age, in the 50s, 60s, 70s of the 20th century. So what do you guys think about that? What do you feel Pokemon and all of the other video games that have some kind of ecological simulation, right? So think Skyrim, think Minecraft. Minecraft has a detailed ecological simulation, right? Think Monster Hunter, for those of you who are in that. Not so much Andromeda. I mean, that's, I guess, like a xeno-ecological simulation, maybe. But yeah, games like No Man's Sky, which has, I believe, over a quintillion star systems and 2 to 6 planets per star system, with a simulated ecology for each one that is distinct or unique, including wildlife, including vegetation and water simulation, and so on and so forth. So what does it mean for national parks? And what I'm really asking is, what does it mean for us as foresters? That the first generation of human history has grown up understanding something about ecology and the outdoors and wildlife, but that something is heavily curated by game designers or movie directors, CGI. What do you guys think? Open question.
We have to be aware of misconceptions. They're probably going to be around.
Yeah, and kind of like the question between how useful are real books now?
Like dead tree versions of books, where you can get the same text on a screen, but there might be something gained or lost in that translation to screen. Okay? Right on.
There's a lot of advantages, obviously, to being in the actual outdoors. And people doing it online, they just are pretty much, they know it's not real, but they're like, oh, well, why would I go out? I don't want to. I understand it enough that they don't have the want to go out, but you still need the benefits of going out.
But then there's also the thing about people who can't access these parks normally.
I mean, that's what we're talking about, with access and wheelchairs and ramps being put in national parks. Like, it's been like that for a while, so I think that it's opened up to pretty much everyone. Obviously not all the parks, because some parks, like, you can't really go backpacking in a wheelchair, but a lot of other things are open and
Okay.
access.
Here's another way to phrase the exact same question. A couple of years ago, Google Street View, right? So they drive cars around with 360 cameras, and they just take a picture every few seconds, right? And they map that onto Google Maps, and so you can pull up what it looks like at pretty much any point in the United States from a ground level view, as well as from detailed orthophotography or 3D model of the Earth in something like Google Earth, right? Lots of different ways to represent the world around us. A while back, Google developed a backpackable version of that 360 camera and strapped it onto some poor bastards who volunteered to go hiking down into the Grand Canyon, for example. So there's now Google Street View down the Bright Angel Trail, for example. And so you can get a photorealistic view, or sequence views, thousands of them, from Southram Village down to the canyon. So what effect does that have on how people use national parks? What do you think?
Well, I would think is that I've had the experience where I roll up to a park and it's not that great, and I just end up leaving. This way I can see if there's a place I'd have more fun and get more out of.
Okay, so kind of like scouting the park before you go there.
Mm-hmm.
Now you said something that's very curious and has potentially a lot sort of packed into it, so let's unpack it a little bit. You said, what if I go to a park and it's not that great? Think about that. We've worked really hard as a society to get to a point where we have really nice park-like spaces. In fact, we take for granted how park-like our campus is. We have a couple hundred tree species on campus, both ornamental, native, and exotic. And we have award-winning effort, right? We are a Tree Campus USA. It's a short list of college campuses that are just nice to be in because they're green, they're maintained, they're park-like. And so to show up to a park and it's not that great, what might drive somebody to go to a park where the foresters, the rangers, etc., the timber stand managers, the burn bosses, everybody have been working really hard to make this park everything it possibly can be, right? The American National Park System is the gold standard for national parks in the world. So how could we get to a park and be like, oh, it's okay, I guess, you know?
And there's like a natural beauty aspect. Like a lot of people, like the ones that are least visited, are the ones that are just kind of like, like the ones that are most visited, like the Rockies and like Yellowstone.
That's something that you're not hoping for.
Yeah. So how do you figure out what you're hoping for? What sets that expectation? What if you've been playing Skyrim for the past 15 years and you get to Ferncliff State Park here and you're like, well, it's fine. I wouldn't take an arrow to the knee for it, but it's okay, I guess. Right? So the hyperrealism of video games, the forced perspective, and around every corner in Skyrim is another beautiful mountain skyline, right? Or horizon. Not every park has that. And so if we grow up with an expectation of, man, the moment I turn on Pokemon Go is 8 years old. The moment I turn on Pokemon Go, it's streaming in data from Niantic servers, figuring out where we might have interesting and interactive wildlife real close to me. And the tight game loop of rolling up on some Pokemon out in the field and see if you can catch it with a regular ball or a super ball or like that bait candy, like giving food to wildlife. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with that, and so forth, right? That's the kind of experience that a lot of us are growing up with. And those early formative experiences are really powerful. and sort of shaping how we think, shaping what we expect when we go to a national park or a local park, and we're like, I mean, it's fine. This doesn't look as cool as the area where I farmed my last Nergigant in Monster Hunter and made that cool armor set. And it also gamifies interacting with wildlife. So in our senior level class, we spend a lot of time talking about how people get bubonic plague from wildlife, die from hantavirus in Yosemite National Park, from camping near mice and stuff. Like, Pokemon is a different sense of what wildlife should be instead of what they are, and how we should interact with them, how we should value them, even how we might think about wildlife. So, I'm not coming down on Pokemon Go or any of these games. I'm a gamer myself. I used to work writing video games. It's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying. But it does powerfully shape how you and I think about the world around us, because these tight gameplay, sort of dopaminergic feedback loops of typically 2 to 3 minutes for a match. Think how long a game or an attack is in Clash of Clans, right? I think you have like 90 seconds or 120 seconds to do the whole thing. It's a very tight adrenaline and dopamine satisfaction loop. It can be addicting. We'll skip wings to base jumping. And so yeah, social media, we get fed a particular kind of very strict view of what is a good use of a cliff. Yeah? All right, let's see. This is busted. This is a speedboat that converts into a hovercraft that converts into a float plane, and it's pretty cool. And once somebody invents something like this, other people figure it out, and now we have a whole bunch of people boating and flying and hovercrafting in places like Rend Lake. And if you're the patrol ranger there, it's like, what do I even... I'm not the FAA. Do I give you a speeding ticket for flying too fast on the lake? Like, how does my life become this, right? But that's the march of technology, media, invention, stuff like that. Let's see. Airsoft in 20 years. Joke, right? So we are de-extincting animals. Nothing could go wrong. We are also seeing some cultural shifts in terms of very recently, there was a push kind of starting in the 1990s to get urban proximate populations aware of parks, into parks, and to have more park-like spaces closer to big cities and in big cities. And that's a very cool thing. It can lead to some difficulty with stuff like graffiti in these natural spaces, as folks use parks in a way that is not part of the design spec for the park, right? Sort of appropriating, making their own, tagging things, leaving messages to each other, and just kind of stating, I was here. This is a very common motivation for doing stuff like this. But it is more and more a thing. And so sometimes it can feel like, man, I'm just a janitor. I keep scraping spray paint off of rocks, and I have to do it very carefully because I can't have these spray paint particles getting into this water, harming our fish populations and so forth at this park. Like, this is a ton of work, and I'm just doing the same thing over and over. This is not satisfying, and so forth. And also, this is an international parks example. I took this at a national park in Japan, where it is a face-saving culture more than American culture will ever be, right? So in face-saving cultures, you don't act out. You don't call attention to yourself, and underlying all of this, you don't bring embarrassment or dishonor upon your family, right? So over there, they can manage people's problematic behaviors in parks by calling attention to an undesirable behavior in the park, for example. So this is for a light rail line serving the national park. It's like, man, it would suck to get caught in the doors of this subway train or this tram or whatever. But man, way more than that, like the bruising you'd get and stuff like that and getting dragged by the train, it would suck if anybody saw you doing that. Like, you just die of embarrassment, right? So, yeah, cultural practices are changing in Japan, here in the US, all over the place, with respect to what people see as appropriate or acceptable in park spaces. So if you've ever been aware of Logan Paul, for example, and some videos that he and some friends made in a Japanese national park looking for dead people, people who had taken their lives in that particular national park, right? Like, the things that people do in parks and the things that people broadcast out of parks has changed rapidly, right? This is a brave new world that we're in. So in the United States, at least among the younger generation, smoking is not so much a thing much at all. It's much more about vaping these days, but the social effects are similar. So this is trying to help folks understand, hey, it's not just you in this beautiful place. You are surrounded by other people, and every choice that you make and fail to make affects everybody else too, right? So this kind of messaging works in and around Tokyo and the national parks around there. Like, Tokyo is a city of 25 million people in its greater area, like significantly larger than New York City metroplex. This works over there. In the United States, this kind of messaging, not so much. We're also, these days, and especially since kind of 1980, because 50% of all the carbon we've put in the atmosphere is since 1980. So the other 50% took something like 10, 15,000 years to put that much, that same amount of carbon into the air. So this is a time lapse of global average annual surface temperature anomaly. So this is what people are talking about when they say global warming. This is it. And parks, particularly national parks, at least in the United States, because we tend to put parks around mountain peaks and ranges, because we tend to put parks in the lowest places like the Grand Canyon, a depressional feature, and the lowest elevation dry land spot in the United States, Death Valley, right? Any kind of climate anomaly or climate shift over time hits parks extra hard. And remember, more than half of our total protected area acreage is in Alaska and has been set up there really in our lifetimes, since 1980 or so. And Alaska is experiencing climate change, climate forcing, climate destabilization effects a lot harder, a lot earlier, and a lot faster than we are in the continental United States. So the effect is amplified as you go up in latitude. Okay? A couple of years ago, in the middle of winter in Alaska and across northern Canada, there was a positive 70 degree temperature anomaly. Positive 70. So imagine it was summertime here in southern Illinois, and the temperature gets up to 90, 95 here in the summer on a bad day, right? Imagine it got up to 165 that day. Ecologically speaking, now it didn't get up to 165 in Alaska, right? It went from supposed to be negative 40, or it had been negative 40 historically for a really long time, and it was positive 30, right? That's a huge, huge shift in a very short time. Okay? So, sea levels are rising. Snow caps are melting. We are getting weeks longer growing season in southern Canada, for example, which is good for farmers up there and really bad for things like killing off bark beetles with a hard frost every year and so forth, and so on and so forth. So, all right, let's pick it up from here on Tuesday of, not next, but the following week. We'll start getting ready for our Jeopardy final exam on Tuesday, December 10th at 0800. Don't come here at 10 a.m. We'll just be wrapping up, and it'll be very sad. Okay? Cool. Grab a piece of pumpkin bread on your way out. I have tested it for your safety and satisfaction. And we'll see you after next week. Travel safe. I'm around for questions if you have them.